I suspect that this video will have an extremely long time stamp on it. Something preposterous that people are probably just going to write comments about right away before they even begin to investigate what is the deal with the video being so long. That's fine. That's to be expected. I know the game. I know expectations. I know reactions. I know what things look like. But it's really hard to navigate the space of explaining to people why you would do something that looks the way that you know it looks. And obviously, anybody who engages with the content is going to figure out exactly what it is. They're going to invest. If they do investigate, they will make discovery and potentially have accurate understanding. There will almost surely be gaps, but that's fine. There will always be gaps. You cannot expect... What is this now? Holy shit. You cannot expect to never have any gaps in your communication. If you're expecting that, you're expecting too much, because you are not other people. Other people are not you. I understand it's frustrating, but there's no way, besides literally collective consciousness, for us all to see things exactly the same way. But thankfully, we're already like 90% of the way there. Because the overwhelming majority of human emotion and instinct and drive and ambition all roots from the same basic needs, the same basic structure of things, the Maslow hierarchy, if you will. If you understand the hierarchy of human needs, then you understand everyone's motivations, because everyone has the same basic needs. The only thing that's different is their approach to fulfilling those needs, and whether or not they think that the approach of others and how they fulfill their needs is encroaching on your ability to fulfill your own needs as per your expectations of how those should be fulfilled. And obviously, the negotiation of those disagreements is society. So, I don't know why I just opened by explaining society. I died just now in the game, and I have come to realize that I am so insanely reactive to like the audio visual environment surrounding me that, like, if I don't concentrate really hard, my train of thought is very easily broken by just like sound cues or like the feeling of something like restarting, which is kind of helpful in a way, because it will keep me from just rambling about the same thing forever. Because if I get comfortable with talking too much and I'm not self-conscious about what I'm saying, then I'll just go, lose the plot, go down continuous, extra pathways. Like, even right now, I'm starting to get sick of what I'm saying because I've died several times, because I'm not in the natural flow that I want to be in. But when I am in that flow, then I both play better and speak better, but I'm less likely to keep track of what I'm trying to say. And in trying to keep track of what I'm trying to say, it leads to me, oscillating between concentration on the game and concentration on what I am saying. So I have been searching for a game that wouldn't put me in a position of having to, wouldn't put me in a position of having to break my train of thought too often, but also wouldn't, like, never do so. And I've been working really fucking hard to figure out what game I was going to play on this goddamn show. Like, this is like the third or fourth game that I've bought in the effort of trying to figure out what game to play. Because when I did the first episode playing A Short Hike, I thought that game was absolutely perfect for what I want, which is a game where you cannot die. It's mostly just about exploration. Each area kind of has its own vibe and music, and you can chill in that area for a while and just kind of jump around and explore, and the mechanics are satisfying. But the problem is that the game is too small, and I ramble for a long time. And I would get sick of running around the environment, but I would be afraid to move on from it because the change in tone would cause me to completely lose my train of thought, like just from the change in sound cues and shit. So I thought that playing a Zelda game would have like the right scope, and a game like the Wind Waker or Ocarina of Time that has like big open areas that I just love to run around in and think about shit, I thought would be perfect. The problem is that, actually making it to those areas or progressing through the game does require a degree of paying attention and figuring out what the fuck is going on. So it was hard to actually make progress when I wanted to. So then I switched over to... I tried playing a bunch of other games that, I gave up on. A bunch of games that I emulated, like various Metroid games, like Super Metroid, I gave up on pretty quickly. I really think that it's difficult to confidently navigate a world unless you have like a strong sense of the controls. And there's not a lot of games that I've played enough of because I am so exploration focused. There's not a lot of games where I've gotten like so good at the controls that I can just effortlessly navigate the world. Like, I love Dark Souls. I'd love to just run around in Dark Souls, but when I have to actually stop and fight bosses, I will not be able to talk. So like a game like that, it just has too much to ask from me as a player that I cannot perform. So Metroid Prime was the only game that I'm like good enough at to like play and not really pay attention, and I don't get that frustrated if I get lost or turned around. But the game world, when you do know your way around it and you're not intimidated by it and taking your time, is actually not that big. I mean, it's a fucking GameCube game, like it's got ridiculously amazing graphics for the time period, art design that still holds up. It looks incredible, but like at the cost of the actual scope of the game world, and you do a lot of backtracking and running around through the same areas. That is much more magnified when you're better at the game and not playing it as cautiously or taking as long in each area. So I kind of just like breezed through the first half of the game in one 4-hour podcast, or 6-hour, however the fuck long it was. It was long as shit. I know that. Not as long as this one's probably going to be, though. And so, like, in that case, it was like, well, I've made it too far, and, like, I've gotten to a point where the game gets difficult, where, like, it's no longer just, like, you and the controls. It's, like, think about the situations, can I go back here? This game has a little bit more room for me to stop and take in the scenery and not have to worry about, fighting space pirates. And even when I do die, I just restart. It's no big deal. So, like, you can't really get stuck in one place for too long, because eventually I'll get sick of it and just do the thing. But, anyway, I tried to move on from Metroid Prime to play the game Gris, which is sort of a puzzle platformer that's very atmospheric and also, like, kind of lets you hang out in an area and explore the emotion for a little bit. But it was another game where the areas kind of were not big enough for me to really run around in, and it was kind of more puzzle focused than I realized it was going to be. Less controls focused, because if the game, like this game, is just about like controls, there's nothing to it more than feeling connected to the character, understanding how the actions of my fingers correlate to what's happening on screen. It's not asking for me to think, it's just asking for me to react. Thinking can help with the reaction, it can help to be paying attention, but as long as I have good instincts with my fingers, then that's really what matters. So I have to thank Super Eyepatch Wolf for reminding me of this game, because this is a game I was interested in. However, I had passed over it because of the fact that I wanted to play A Short Hike even more, and they seemed very similar. But A Short Hike seemed like more up my alley in terms of like what it stands for narratively. But I mean, it's kind of a game that you can exhaust quickly. It's not a game that you're really meant to replay over and over again right away, which this literally is. It's like an arcade game. It's like, it's that same kind of, it's the same kind of thing that I want the game to be reflexively, but instead of being thematically relevant, it's kind of just like a blank slate for you to project onto, which is what I want for this show. So, yeah, I would say that this is pretty much the perfect find. So thank you, Super Eye Patch Wolf, for reminding me of this, as well as introducing me to a YouTuber whose name I have not read enough times to pronounce yet. But I will put a link in the description to a really great analytical YouTuber who talks about a lot of like girl media of the late 90s and early 2000s, that none of which I am familiar with, as at that age I was starkly anti-Disney Channel. Like, didn't really hate Disney movies as much as I do now, but like I did not watch the Disney Channel because like I was just very aggressively only into cartoons, and I'll get into why that is as this video goes on. It has a lot to do with repression and with just emotional avoidance and kind of just being overwhelmed by live action media, like just kind of seeing it, I don't know, like the characters, it was difficult for me to project onto most characters in live action media because I could not relate to most of them, because I did not find characters that reminded me of my own experiences at a glance. I'm sure that if I had actually given a lot of those shows a chance, I would have related to those characters, but I was just like, it was such a struggle for me to even like try to connect with these like very normie looking characters in these shows, that I would see on Nickelodeon or those or Disney Channel, whereas Cartoon Network, being strictly cartoons, nothing else, was very important to me. It's all I watched all the time because all I wanted to see was cartoons, and it had a lot to do with me just like really wanting to remain in my childhood, like being kind of obsessed with this idea throughout, pretty much up until I was like, pretty much up until puberty. I was like very obsessed with the idea of like maintaining my sense of childhood and like not growing up, not selling out my identity by growing up, basically. And that's kind of what this Exorcism is here to unpack, because I think that's the element of my personality that has been the most problematic, the most difficult to deal with, and the source of so much repression is this clinging to a oh, I actually finished the level. Oh, I'm gonna do it again, but first I'm gonna have a drink. Not gonna edit the pauses because this is gonna be long, and I ain't got time. Anyway. Yeah, I need to get over these tendencies that I have, of wanting to cling to this past experience. And even though I've gotten over a lot of it, I've never gotten over all of it. And I think that the difficulty is that what that past experience is, like what the root of my identity is, was very oblique to me. That, like, because of the things that I was hiding from, or the things that I refused to acknowledge in order to make things easier for myself, it was just like, it was, like, I think there were a lot of opportunities throughout my life where I was very close to some kind of awakening to what was really going on with me, like, what is my true nature, and those moments disappeared, and the manic depression of literally like living a life that bounces between like periods where things are just going extremely well for me and my family, and periods where things are going extremely poorly, at least from my perspective, for me and my family. That bifurcation like is ultimately the root of everything. All of my behavior is a result of this bipolarity. And like, I've been an avid studier from a distance of psychology since I was in my teens, like, because when I think that, particularly if you're somebody on the internet, I'm sure you understand this, but like, the more that you feel othered from society, the more you feel like you don't fit in, the more you feel like you need to study society. You need to figure out, like, okay, well, what's different about me? What am I doing wrong? What are other people doing right? What is making things easier for them and making things harder for me? And even though you might recognize a lot of these things, there are certain things that, that you can't figure out, as well as certain things that you can't fix. Like, there are a lot of problems in the world. It is fundamentally broken. And at the root, when I trace back all the problems that I have in my life, they all have reasonable causes. And by reasonable, I don't mean that, like, that they should have occurred or were reasonable in that they happened. I mean reasonable in that there is a reason, like, there's always a cause and effect for everything. Causality is the one truth of the universe that is observable to us. So, it's the only thing we can rely on as a lightning rod of something we can describe as truth. And, when I look, it's extremely difficult to determine causality because of how chaotic the world is, that the conditions of the universe are so sprawling, and there are so many cause and effects that, like, to ascribe one thing as a cause to an effect is a terrifying proposition, because in reality, you could go as far back as you want. And for me, throughout my teen years, I had this really... no, I shouldn't say throughout my teen years. Throughout my whole life, because it's still true. In fact, this is kind of the reason that this video is what it is. I always feel the need to go back to the very beginning of the universe in order to explain something. Because I, myself, am an outlier. I am an extremely uncommon, if not alien, possibility of what a human outcome can be. And not to say that I think that any two people are exactly the same. I absolutely don't. I totally do think that everybody has enough significant difference from people around them that even if most of your experiences are similar, your perspective on them is almost certainly going to be different just as a result of being different people. There are some cases of, like, identical twins who come extremely close to literally being the same person, but I would assume that they themselves have a deep categorical understanding of what is different about them, So, and we all do. Like, that's the thing. Like I said before, we are all 90% on this, like, in search of the same thing, the same hierarchy of needs. It's just that the last 10% is the part that we're obsessed with. We're completely obsessed with, like, whatever part of it we have that's whatever part of our understanding happens to be different from everyone else's. And it's not that we all need to inflict that on everyone. In fact, learning not to feel that way is pretty much the key to successful society. But it's just an issue of we need to understand why people feel the way they do, because otherwise, if their feelings encroach on ours and they can't explain, they can't justify to us why they should be allowed to encroach on us in a way that we can accept, then we always have to ask ourselves, well, okay, well, like, why, like, I don't understand why I have to put myself at a detriment when I don't understand how, like, this sacrifice is falls on me to make in service of you, unless I understand why you deserve, not necessarily deserve in terms of, like, that you as a person are worthwhile and therefore deserve a treatment, but, like, what am I getting out of it? Like, why, like, if I'm making this sacrifice for you, then, like, how does it benefit me to help you in this way? Like, am I just making, like, am I just making a sacrifice so that I can be with you? And if so, Like, why do I have to do that, but you don't, you know? And many would see it as like, well, if that's, I guess I would put it this way. If that is how you feel, it means that you do need help. You need help in the same way that the person asking you for help needs help. But you don't necessarily perceive it that way. Not because you're blind to your own issues, but more in the sense that, like, if you were fulfilled, then you would feel as though helping other people was the next step, I guess. And I know that's, like, insulting to say, to tell people whether or not they are fulfilled. But, like, you know, I guess the way I would put it is, for me, as somebody who I do not feel personally fulfilled within the guidelines of what my expectations are for my own life. And that is something that I struggle with. And so, for me, it's like, there's a level, like, I understand the parameters of the fulfillment. Like, I understand where I'm falling short, like, what I need, but I don't understand how to get there, you know? It's like, it's just like, it feels like something's missing, you know, as MGMT said once. And that doesn't necessarily have to be like a torturous feeling, and it isn't. You know, I would say that I'm, like, honestly, like, probably one of the best places I've ever been mentally. It's been a very long time since I've had what I would describe as feelings of depression, which is a reason that I think it's been difficult for me to connect with my audience as much, because a lot of my audience is very depressed, and they really related to me when I was depressed. And when the message I tried to send was, hey, like, my life is changing for the positive, and I want to celebrate that, but I also have to acknowledge that, like, you know, even though, like, I am in the process of things getting better, it doesn't mean that things are good. I have a lot of, like, inner stuff to deal with. But I think that, like, the presentation of this idea that, like, oh, I've moved on to a next stage, and how have I done that? It's because I met someone who fulfills my personal needs, and therefore, you know, like, and therefore I just, like, am better than I was, and, like, am more capable of dealing with my issues. And it's like, that's not very helpful to people, because I didn't really understand what about this relationship was so helpful to me, you know? Like, I mean, I understood it in some terms, and there's a lot of stuff I just didn't want to say to the internet, you know? Like, if you listen to the couple of albums and stuff that I made, and, like, all the videos I made around the time of us getting together, like, I referenced the fact that, like, you know, May and I have a lot of sex, or that we, you know, we have in-depth conversations, that we understand each other super well, that we, like, deal with similar feelings. But I would not really go into a ton of depth about what those feelings are, what it is that we are helping one another to deal with, because I didn't really understand it completely. I have to navigate those feelings. It takes time, and I'm not ready to talk about it until I have navigated it. And, like, you know, when your audience connects with you on the basis of the fact that you are talking about feelings that they similarly have to you, and that you have spent years, you know, navigating in detail, finding words to describe, and you're just basically pouring out all these, you know, things that you've been observing forever, you know, just like the same ground you've been retreading for, you know, a decade. And then suddenly you have all this new shit to learn, all this new stuff to unpack, and you have to do all that while still appealing to the same audience, while still sharing personal stories, while still, you know, talking about the media you consume and how you connect to it. Because that's what is at the core of my content, is, like, there seems to be this expectation that people have of me that what I do is I am an anime analyst. So I go out, I watch an anime, I find out what there is to say about that show, and then I write a video about it and edit it and release it. And to some extent, that is true, or has been true in certain cases, but I have never made a video about a show I could not figure out anything to say about. Ultimately, that is my bottom line, is I'm not just going to make something up, and I'm not just going to, like, say something that is, like, obvious that other people could have observed. Just, like, I'm not going to play devil's advocate, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Like, I have no interest in just, like, describing, like, the ways in which a show can be interesting. Like, I want to describe shows I'm interested in, that I personally feel the connection to, because that emotional content is what people come to my videos for. Like, and, like, sure, it's a lot harder to make that kind of content because you have to actually have those emotional relationships, and you can't get that from just, like, speed watching a bunch of shit that's popular, you know. And if you do develop an emotional connection with something that isn't popular and you try to talk about it, or that isn't in the interests of your audience, like if I try to talk about something that's not anime, it's a lot harder for you to get people to give a shit, you know? And, like, for me, I have this one section of my audience that's you know, the people who usually watch these videos, who will tell me things like, I don't care what kind of videos you make whatever you want, and I'll watch it and I'll pay for it. And I love that. That is what has allowed me to experiment so much over the last few years and make series like this. However, it is not everyone's sentiment. There are also people whose sentiment is, you know, I want you to continue to make anime videos, and if you stop doing, like, heavily edited anime videos, I'm not going to be a patron anymore. And I have always been afraid of losing those patrons, because I've always kind of lived my life on the edge, because I'm not good at following through on plans, because I constantly have new ideas, and the new ideas always seem better than the old ideas. And it's just like, it's really hard for me to convince myself to stick to an idea that I no longer believe is the best idea, you know? Like, if I really think that changing gears will benefit me, then I want to. However, if you change gears constantly, you know, like, think about the way I'm approaching this level, right? Like, I will take a route, try it a few times, and if I don't succeed, I try a different route. As a result, I don't get a ton of practice on one route. I can, because I haven't decided which route I think ultimately I would rather try to practice on. It probably would have benefited me more in this case to just simply have picked one and, you know, and memorized it and learned it. But because of the fact that I don't know, like, what all of the potential routes are, I don't know, you know, how many tries is, like, appropriate for me to, you know, think, okay, well, this one's, like, too difficult for me, like, maybe I need to try a different, easier way, you know, like, maybe this takes more practice, or I don't have enough finesse with the controls. Like, it's just, like, there's a billion reasons that it could be that I'm struggling to make it past this part. But the fact of the matter is that I am struggling. And this is what my career is like. It's me constantly thinking, okay, well, like, this idea seems better than this idea. But now that I'm actually trying this idea, I'm struggling to get it done. So maybe I'm not good enough to do this idea that was better. But in the process of working on it, I've picked up on some techniques that make me think, well, maybe if I did it this way, then it would work. And then so I start working on the new way of doing things, and that works out for a little while. But through doing that, I start to imagine how it could be even better. How if I added more detail, people would get it even more, and it would become an even better product, and I would make even more money, and it would appeal to even more people. So I start trying to make it better. But then I'm not meeting consumer demand in one area or another, and it's just this constant clusterfuck, and it's been that way for the whole time. It's been that way literally the whole time. And like, if whatever period people got into me at, because of the fact that, you know, if you've been following me for, like, let's say you were following me for a period of like 3 months, and like in those 3 months I was doing some, like, a really consistent form of content, And, like, people experience this kind of time dilation when they think back on the past where, like, I don't know, it seems, I guess, during certain periods, it seems like everything was happening way faster than it was, you know? Like, people will remember me as, like, I was way less consistent with my content back in, like, the earlier days of my career than I was in, like, there was a period in 2016 where I had, like, a big burst of doing things for, like, a few months. And that was, like, the biggest growth period of my channel. So I think that, like, there's a lot of people who got into me in this one period where it just so happened that, like, I was experimenting with covering, like, more current stuff, and I was getting content out more consistently, and the Asterisk War Sucks series had just wrapped up, and, like, the fact that that had already been a pretty successful series, but, like, it also continually piggybacked off the success of the other videos I made after it. It was just, like, all this stuff played into each other, and, like, it looked like I had the career of, like, a standard anime YouTuber, especially because, like, you know, other guys who were growing at the time were covering the same shows in a similar fashion. And, you know, we were influencing each other. But, like, ultimately my goal was not to be somebody who covers current shows. My goal was just to cast a wide net so that people would get into my deeper content, which has always been the case because that's just what pays out better in terms of, like, people who care about the content more will get more invested, and, you know, not only is that better for me because I get to have more interesting conversations with people about the content, they're more on the same page as me, they're more likely to be friends with me, and also they're more likely to give me more money because they want me to continue to make content that they highly relate to, you know? So, like, you know, I don't want to, like, necessarily go through all the stories again and again because the kind of people who would watch this video are people who've probably heard those stories because they're the people who I'm talking about, you know? And you guys are the ones who ultimately, in my mind, when people say things like, oh, Digi is kept afloat by, like, a sycophantic audience that will just, like, watch whatever she does, you know, it's like, I want to be in character and say he because I don't expect the person who leaves this comment to respect my gender identity, but, you know, I also want to correctly address myself. I guess you know, I think people are well, if you, the people who are listening to this, you are well acquainted with the story of Boston at this point. You understand what was going on up through there. I don't think that the story of Virginia Beach has been told cohesively enough to understand how it led to where we are now. So I'll try to do that, and I'll be brief with the early part of it. I mostly want to fixate on this year, because this year has been fucking absolute madness, as you all have experienced. But, you know, in escaping Boston and coming to Virginia Beach, my mentality was like, I'm going to rebuild. I'm going to rebuild from the ground up. I'll take my time. I'll figure out, like, the best way forward. But, like, the most important thing to me was that I wanted to just basically make whatever videos came into my head, but do them to their full aesthetic potential. That was my main focus. Was like, let's say I wanted to do a video that's just like a 4-minute weird little, like, meme idea. I wanted to realize that as fully as I can and just not skimp on anything. And just the idea is every video will be good. They come out as quickly as I can make these videos to their full potential. Hopefully that's quick, you know, but sometimes it won't be. And, like, we're going through with that. But in order to create some sense of expectation and structure, there would be a series of sort of characters / subjects that each had their own location. So each room of the house would have its own distinct aesthetic and its own character who lives in that room, played by me, who would talk about that subject. And this is partially a way for me to explore the idea of myself as a plural identity, which I was kind of toying around with a lot in 2017, in places like The Unknown Tape, or, like, you know, just anywhere that you know, anywhere that I'm using multiple characters. The idea of art so fart so, just like, you know, this bifurcation where it's like, oh, you know, even though Digibro is already like somewhat a character, these characters are even more a character, and even though they all represent something about me, there's also like a performative element that, you know, that makes it clear that I don't necessarily consider Digibro to harbor the same opinions as these characters, even if they are ways that I obviously do think. Something within me thinks this way, you know, but not all of me thinks this way. Let's put it that way. So, like, you know, Art So Fart So is like my schizo thoughts, which I don't think are inaccurate, but I don't think they're accurate. So it's like, you know, I package them in the form of Art So Fart So. He doesn't care if the information is inaccurate. He's an artist. That's why he's Art So Fart So, you know. So, like, by doing that, I feel comfortable exploring those feelings. However, as I became more in the mindset that, like, okay, well, I just, like, want to be Art So Fart So all the time. Like, this is just, like, closer to my mentality. Like, I don't want to, you know, have to put this on as a facade. It's just, like, I am Art So Fart So, you know? So it's, like, at that point, it became that, like, I lost touch with the idea that, like, this separate identity is necessary. And that usually happens to me. Like, and in the case of the Rainbow Ranch, like, I moved in, and I built out the rainbow room that, you know, and I bought the rainbow t-shirt and became the rainbow person. And the idea of the rainbow character is that it is basically the collective. It's just Digibro. Like, Digibro is the rainbow man because Digibro has no one concrete identity. He is the house for all of these identities. He is the rainbow. He's all the colors put together. And the rainbow room is the central hub of the Rainbow Ranch. But each other room has its own color aesthetic, its own purpose, and its own character. So, for instance, the bedroom is pink aesthetic, and it is covered in porn posters. It is the Porno Pagoda, which has been built, finally. But the Porno Pagoda is where Hentai Samurai lives, you know? Hentai Samurai is not Digibro. Hentai Samurai has his own unique opinions from Digibro. But, you know, it's still a character that can't exist without, you know, the platform that I give to them, if you will. Fuck. As digi-nee now. But, yeah, so, like, that was the conceit. But as I was building out the place, like, I gradually grew to think that it was overscoping and irresponsible because people were waiting for content. You know, I'd put out a couple of things, so I kind of felt like I was back in the saddle. There was some modern anime I was interested in talking about, like, you know, Mob Psycho had come out. You know, so, like, and it's really difficult for me, like, if there's something that seems like a good idea to talk about, even if I only have a little bit to say, I always feel like I should go for it because, like, a lot of my biggest videos have been that. Like, my Konosuba video, that, like, you know, I just, like, watched the first, like, 4 episodes of this. Well, I think there might have been 6 episodes out at the time. I watched the first 6 episodes, wrote the script in like an hour, you know, edited it in like another hour, and the video has 1 million views and was a huge success. So, like, you know, obviously it is sometimes a good idea to make just kind of sell-outy videos that, you know, that people like anyways because they appreciate what I'm saying and, like, the fact that I like the show. But it doesn't always pay off, you know? And then if it doesn't pay off, then it's like, oh, well, that's time I could have spent working on the thing I was passionate about. And instead I worked on this thing, you know? And, like, and now I still need something to pay the bills because that didn't do it. And now, you know, and now I've found 4 more things that I want to buy for the house that I don't have the money for, you know, and like, you know, I couldn't finish building out all the rooms because I just don't have enough shit of each color aesthetic to actually complete each room of the Rainbow Ranch. And I also couldn't really identify fully what I wanted each character to be, because I knew that I wanted there to be at least one, if not two, female characters in this, this whole thing. And I didn't know what kind of feminine identity I was like willing to portray on the internet. Like, I just had really no idea. I just knew that I wanted to have some kind of feminine identity because I want to be a woman. Because I am a woman. It's become easier and easier for me to, register myself as a woman in the mirror. I mean, it helps wearing girlier clothes. But, even when I'm not, I don't feel that same sense of self-doubt of like, oh, you can't be a woman because you look this way, And I think that self-doubt is the most dangerous thing that I experienced throughout my life, heavily tied to this exorcism that we're trying to do here. But, we'll get to everything in time. Just the nature of the questions that I'm going to answer on this episode, I think will take us through all the places that we need to go. But yeah, like, I think that I'm gonna choose the other, I'm gonna go to the other mission where it was, die less than 30 times instead of the try to do it in 3 minutes challenge, because it's like trying to rush myself causes me to die more. Oh, I think I actually unlocked the second stage. Well, it was already counting me doing 21 crashes or fewer. Excellent. Well, sick titties. Let's move past this introductory section, because I think, look, the reason this video is going to be so long is that I cannot contain an idea. I can't do it. They spiral out of control. I don't know where to compress. I only know how to follow the way of ever-branching paths. I sit in Yggdrasil's panopticon. I see all the possibilities of how I could approach the thing, and I have no idea which one I want. Because what I ultimately want is to connect with the audience, but I want to connect with them as deeply and as personally as possible. And ultimately, it's a self-satisfying kind of thing, because like, obviously there are people who, even watching my, my most accessible content, will get very deep connections out of it, even like, at least something that could be valuable to them, even if it's not valuable to me. But I need the value to myself, because at the core, my content is not just about being understood by other people. It's also about being understood by myself. I need to know why I like the things I like, to understand what is separating me from everybody else in society. And I think that, it would have been easier if I had just talked to people more. If I had just, like, had more social interaction, I would have better understood what the differences were between my 10% and I think I, like most people, especially, and all of you listening, I'm sure there's many of you who are thinking, oh, there's a lot more than 10% for me. No. There's probably less than 10% for you. I don't even think there's much more. I don't even think I have more than 10% different from anybody else. Like 10% at the most. But that 10% is very easy to fixate on when you don't know anybody else who has the same 10% as you, or even like a one of those extra 10, and like when people fixate on that percentage, that's where the othering happens. It's like they assume that because this one thing about you is different, everything about you must be different, when the reality is it's just the one thing. It's just this one thing that's different. In my case, as a kid, I looked and behaved in all ways like the social expectation of a girl, but there was one thing that was different. Professor Utonium accidentally added an extra ingredient to the concoction, chromosome Y, and thus the Powerpuff Boy was born. And yeah, like, it's just like, if I myself had thought, like, to say something to somebody, like, let's say they said, "Oh, you are a girl," and I say, "Well, like, you know, why do you say so?" And they say, "Because you have long hair." And I say, like, okay, like, can I still be a girl if I like, you know, this and that things that I like? And they say yes or no. I don't know. I don't know how I could have navigated figuring out that I wanted to be a girl before the point that I did, which is when I went through puberty. And, like, I mean, the way I confirmed it was to talk to girls, which we're going to get to in a minute, as I answer this person's question when I finally do read it. This like, I'm a little worried that, like, I'm on the second map of this game and it's already getting treacherous enough to the point where I feel like I need more concentration. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to stick to this game. I don't know if this is going to be the golden child that I thought it was, because for the second time in a row, as I also experienced with Gris, I am completely locked into just trying to do the introductory segment, and I've been going for 50 fucking minutes, and I haven't felt like I grasped the game well enough to feel confident moving on to questions. Maybe I just can't play a video game when I do this show. I just don't know what to replace it with. Like, do I just want to be on camera? Because I do think, you know, maybe it would be easier if I gesticulate for you to fully appreciate my communication. Maybe that's part of what the appeal was of my vlogs for some people. You know, I enjoy the abstraction of trying to express myself through the artifice of a game, but there's just no game I can find that fits the communication style that I'm trying to accomplish with this show, that I can figure out, you know? And, like, I don't know. Is there, like, I thought about some kind of just visual, but, like, I want to be able to interact with whatever visual it is. I mean, I could just draw. I could try doing a draw stream, but I tend to not be able to, you know, like, concentrate well on drawing while talking. So, you know, it's just a matter of having something that you are adept at. And I'm adept at speaking for extreme lengths of time, but I'm not necessarily adept at doing something else simultaneously. There's not something else that I am adept at enough to do it at the same time. And with video games, you know, you can kind of have, like, general gaming skill, but, like, it helps to have expertise in a specific game, as each game kind of has its own rules and expectations for you to manipulate. And there's just not a game that I'm good enough at or have spent enough time with to understand that way. So what can I do that would be engaging, other than just to be on camera? Why don't I want to be on camera? Is it just out of insecurity? Or out of thinking it will be boring? Or just not wanting to just be literally, like, talking into a camera for 7 hours, because I would much rather, like, have something to do with my hands, or something that provides music and sound so that I don't feel like I'm just, like, sitting in a quiet room by myself. I'll figure it out.